Good day, fish tankers. Maybe you are tired of just having a fish tank with some plastic plants in inert sand or gravel, or just having a tank with a few plants where you put some root tabs into the sand or the gravel that you have to keep doing month after month, and you want a nice planted aquarium or even an aquascape, and for that you need an active substrate. And what is that? You basically have two choices. The one is aqua soil, and then the other one, of course, is a dirted substrate. Which one of these are better, and what are the pros and cons? If you're interested in that, stick around. Right, let's start with the bottom line, which is price. Now, with aqua soil, you kind of get what you pay for. There are various kinds on the market, going from more moderately priced to very expensive. We can start with Ista aqua soil, we can move to Langa aqua soil, then we have aqua soils like Denali, and we also have an Aqua Vitro aqua soil, and then eventually we get to the Amazonia aqua soil. And they vary in terms of the nutrients they have and the way they interact with the water, as well as the structure, because aqua soil is, of course, these little sintered clay balls. And if you look at the cheaper ones, you'll see they'll crumble a bit easier, the balls are a bit more loose. If you look at the more expensive ones, then they may have a more solid structure. So there's a range of aqua soil. And on the other hand, we have dirted substrate over here, which of course is a soil mixture on the bottom capped with sand. Now here it's a no-brainer. Even the cheapest aqua soil is much more expensive than dirted substrate. So if it comes to the bottom line, dirted substrate wins hands down. It's the cheaper option of the two by a country mile. Now the second thing that we want to look at is aesthetics. What does it look like? Now you can see with a dirted tank here next to me, what a lot of people don't like, it needs a reasonably thick sand cap, the way I do it with deep substrates. You want a 3-inch substrate, and a lot of people don't like the aesthetics of this. They don't like the way, that thickness of a substrate, and it limits you because you want a tank that's at least, let's say, 14 inches high. 16 inches might be better, you know, to offset that deep substrate. There are ways you can get around it. We've all seen MD Fish Tanks, great channel, and he slopes the substrate from the front to the back, and he puts the soil part often in little filter mesh bags, and that is a way you can get around it. But people often don't like the aesthetics of that. Even if you get around it, you'll see over here this tank gets a bit of sunlight, so you'll see some algae growing there by the side, and you can't dig in there and scrape away the algae, because you don't want to disturb the substrate, because it develops all sorts of microbes. So that's the trouble that people sometimes have over aesthetics of dirted substrate. You can get around it in many ways. I've explained what MD Aquascape, MD Fish Tanks does, but you could conceivably also have a stand where there's a rim that's a bit higher up, maybe of wood, so you hide some of that if it bothers you. Now, if you go to aqua soil, it's got better aesthetics, I feel. You know, it's about, so because you don't have to have it as deep, you can slope it, you can shape it in many ways of your hardscape. So I think it doesn't have this thing that you have to look at. So in that sense, it's better. But on the other hand, keep in mind with dirted substrate, you can use any color of sand. You can use white, which I'm not a fan of. You can use black blasting sand. You can use more brown colored sand. Your color of your substrate, you have a lot more options. Whereas with aqua soil, you are going to be limited. Most aqua soils are black. There's a dark brown one called, I think, Akadama, that you also have, but that's going to be your choices. You're not going to get white aqua soil. You can maybe put aqua soil on parts of a tank and then have a bit of a white sandy beach in front. That can also be done. But, you know, I think of aesthetics, aqua soil maybe wins, although it's less versatile color-wise. Now, the third thing is ease of installation. Now, aqua soil wins hands down. All you have to do is pour it onto the bottom of a tank. There's no washing, there's no layering, nothing of a sort, you know. Aquaswell, you just pour it in, you're good to go, and you start scaping your tank. Now, with dirted substrate, it's a bit more complicated. There's a recipe. Everyone has its own recipe. Some just take garden soil. I don't like that because we don't use pesticides in our garden, but I'm never sure if some gardener comes in that we might hire and uses something and it gets in the tank. So I won't use that. I have a soil mixture of peat, potting soil and compost. And there's ways you can go wrong with that soil mixture at the bottom. There are different recipes. It can be a bit daunting for a beginner. And then the sand cap, of course, sand you have to wash, and sand is dirty, and it's a lot of washing under the tap. So the installation of a dirted cap with deep sand substrate kind of tank is there's a lot more graft in it and a lot more things in it than just pouring in the Aquaswell. Now, which one grows plants better? Now, at first glance, you would think that that's out and out Aquaswell, because you see these lush aquascape tanks and they always have Aquaswell, and you can make the mistake of thinking it's just the Aquaswell. It is the Aquaswell, but also remember the vast majority of these tanks have CO2 injection. Then I've had Aquaswell in this cube tank for close to 2 years, and the plants grew just as well as they did in the dirted substrate. I had no CO2. You don't have to have CO2 to use Aquaswell, remember that. And the growth of the plants were more or less the same. Maybe it takes initially a little bit more time in the beginning for the plants to start taking off, because their roots need to get to the nutritious layer of the soil underneath. Sometimes if it's an Amazon sword or a really big root feeder, you can stick in a few root tabs just to help the process. So it's much of a muchness to me as to which substrate, just the substrate on their own without CO2, grows the best, has the best plant growth. For me, they're more or less even. You know, there's not a big difference. If there's maybe it leans slightly towards Aquaswell, depending if you have the better brands of the more expensive brands of Aquaswell. So to me, there's not much of a difference. Now, the other thing is maintaining water quality. We have our filtration for that, and we do certain maintenance like water changes, but a substrate is next to your filtration, and if you have an undergravel filter, it is in fact your filter, is your biggest filter in the tank. And with a deep substrate like over here, the theory is at least that in the lower layers of the substrate, anaerobic bacteria develops, and that also does full denitrification. In other words, it converts your nitrate to nitrogen that the plants take up, if I understand it correctly. By the deep substrate, over time, you've got to give it, I would say, about 2 months before you see the difference. These dirted substrates, they start breaking down nitrate, NO3, which is, of course, is an advantage. You don't have to do water changes as often. Some should say, or say never do water changes. I'm not a fan of never water changes, but I do water changes every 6 weeks, as opposed to when I just had gravel or sand with root tabs into it. I had to do it weekly. Now, here's another surprise. I kept this with Aquaswell for 2 years, and I found the actual same thing happens with Aquaswell. Those little balls have a structure where inside that little ball, it develops an anaerobic section. And that's something that I found out from Alexander Williamson and his channel Fish Theory. Go check it out. But I have found it, and that made sense to me, because in my practical experience, when I had this with Aquaswell, I also found over time, after a couple of months, that the nitrates stay very low. It doesn't build up. So both Aquaswell and dirted substrate, in my experience, I have found to reduce nitrates a little bit. Now we look at longevity. How long does the substrate last before you have to replace it? Now, my experience of Aquaswell has been on the cheaper Aquaswells. That was, I think, Easter Aquaswell in this little tank here. And it lasted for about 2 years. And the plants were still growing. There was a slight drop in plant growth, I think. And what I saw happen on the bottom layer of that Aquaswell, the little balls disintegrate. So it becomes sort of a thin mud. There was no crash in the tank. no problem with the water quality of a fish, but it just slowly started disintegrating. And if you leave it like that, it might well be fine. And if most of the aqua soil manufacturers will tell you that the lifetime of a product is around 2 years when you have to start replacing it or supplement it maybe with a few root tabs like that. But I could maybe have carried on for 2 years, but the structure started changing after about 2 years. So aqua soil could have a more limited lifespan. Tell me in the comment section, if you had aqua soil, how long did it last? Have you had it for years and can it last much longer? Or did you find after a certain while you had to replace them? Now, dirted substrate. I can tell you for a fact, the tank that's a little bit further down the desk, it's not in a screenshot now, has been going for over 3 years now. And there's no slowdown in the plant growth. So I know it works for over 3 years. There's some people would say it works for a lifetime. Now, I think with the way the dirted substrates sometimes work is a lot of a fish waste, because I don't really gravel whack or siphon away some waste that looks unsightly. You can't gravel whack the dirted substrate or an aqua soil substrate by sticking in the gravel vac. I made another video of it. You can hover and just over it and just get rid of the detritus, but you can't stick it in, you'll disturb your system. But I have found that I've never used root tabs in any of these dirted substrates, only with Amazon swords in a tank that I had downstairs way in the beginning. But I have never had to replenish the substrate here. It seems to go on for a very long time. So I think in terms of longevity, for me, dirted substrate wins. So that's it. Those are the pros and cons of dirted substrate over here versus aqua soil. So those are things you have to consider. What I really like about aqua soil is the ease of installation, right? And if it's in the budget, maybe I'd go for aqua soil. What I like about the dirted substrate is how it sort of becomes very ecosystem-ish, and it matures over time. And I even like looking at all this discoloration in the sand substrate and the striations and the roots and all of that. I think that's nice for me. But you're never going to win a big international aquascaping contest with dirted substrate, right? So then you're going to have to go aqua soil. Well, that's it for me. Those are my thoughts on dirted tanks versus aqua soil. And that's it. So guys, until I see you again, keep taking good care of those domestic denizens of the deep.